All right, ready for a deep dive? Today, it's two kings. The whole thing. You guys gave us quite the challenge, but this book, it's like historical drama with some seriously intense plot twists, power struggles, divine interventions, and stories that'll make you go, wait, did I read that right?
Oh, it's intense, for sure.
Yeah.
Takes us through a pivotal time for Israel when faith and politics, really collide. We'll see kings rise and fall, prophets challenging the status quo, and the fate of not one, but two kingdoms hanging in the balance.
So much drama.
Oh.
And we start with Elijah, right? One of the most iconic prophet in the Bible. His final act is this showdown with King Ahaziah, who, after a nasty fall, decides to consult a pagan god for a cure. Like, can you believe that? The king of Israel going to Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron, for help?
It's bold, and God is not happy. He sends a messenger with, honestly, a pretty sarcastic message like, is there no God in Israel? Do you really have to go all the way to Ekron for medical advice?
Right. Ouch. But it gets even, more intense. The king, instead of getting the hint, sends soldiers to arrest Elijah. Not one, not two, but three sets of soldiers. And the first two, let's just say they don't have a good time, thanks to, God's judgment.
Talk about a statement. You can feel the tension building, with each encounter. Really highlights how much authority Elijah had as God's prophet, even facing a king.
The third captain, he learns from the mistakes, approaches Elijah with a lot more respect. Things shift a bit there. Elijah agrees to go with him to the king, but, it's clear that the message isn't going to be good news.
This whole episode is not just a story, right? It sets the stage for Elisha taking over. Remember how Elisha asks for a double portion of Elijah's spirit?
Yeah.
Might seem weird if you're not familiar with the Bible, but it means he's asking for more greater prophetic power.
And then the farewell.
Yeah,
Talk about an exit, right? Parting the Jordan River, chariot of fire descending from the sky, Elijah being whisked away in a whirlwind.
Straight out of Hollywood. And for Elisha, it's like confirmation. He's the prophetic leader now. Even picks up Elijah's cloak, uses it to part the Jordan himself, showing everyone that the spirit of Elijah, it's with him.
Elisha doesn't just get the cloak, though. He gets the gift for miracles, too. Multiplying oil for a widow to pay off her debts, giving a childless woman a son, and then even bringing that son back to life after he dies suddenly.
God cares about people's struggles. It's a powerful reminder. I mean, back then, widows, childless women, they were really vulnerable. These miracles, they're not just about God's power, but his compassion.
Yeah, compassion, definitely a recurring theme. But then we have Naaman, the Syrian commander with leprosy. This guy's powerful, wealthy, but desperate for healing. And Elisha tells him to go wash in the Jordan River 7 times.
Imagine being Naaman, this proud, accomplished military leader told to basically take a bath.
Right. Seriously.
Yeah.
I have this awful disease, and you want me to take a dip in a muddy river.
Exactly. But that's what makes this story so interesting. Naaman humbles himself, follows the instructions, and he's healed completely. It's like sometimes healing, breakthroughs, they require us to let go of pride and just trust.
And there's another layer, right? Elisha's servant, Gehazi, tries to, capitalize on this, secretly takes gifts from Naaman. Greed, deception, classic.
And it backfires. Gehazi ends up with leprosy himself, the same disease Naaman was healed of, trying to manipulate God's work for personal gain. Never ends well.
Elisha's got his own, political drama going on, too. He keeps revealing the Syrian king's plans to the Israelite king. Divine spy, talk about high stakes.
Fascinating how Elisha's role goes beyond just miracles, right? He's protecting Israel, even if it means getting involved in politics. And of course, there are consequences. The Syrian king retaliates, besieges Samaria, leading to a horrific famine.
It's hard to imagine that level of desperation. We even see accounts of, cannibalism. Shows you how bad it got.
It's brutal. The impact of war on innocent people, just devastating.
But there's this, glimmer of hope. Those 4 lepers who go out of the city starving and find the Syrian camp completely abandoned.
Unexpected, right. God made the Syrians hear an army approaching. They fled in terror. Even when things seem hopeless, God can intervene.
And those lepers, initially they're hesitant, but they end up being heroes. They tell the city, the famine ends, suddenly there's food again.
A great example of how even those who are marginalized, overlooked, they can be part of God's plan.
Okay, so we've got prophets, miracles, kings making, questionable decisions. And now a power shift. Jehu, a warrior, is anointed by a prophet and given a very specific and, let's be honest, brutal task: wipe out the entire house of Ahab.
And he does. Jehu orchestrates the downfall of Jezebel, the queen. She's thrown from a window and trampled by horses. It's gruesome, but it also fulfills Elijah's prophecy from years earlier.
Talk about karma.
Yeah.
Jehu goes on to eliminate all of Ahab's descendants, no doubt who's in charge now. Chilling reminder that God takes sin seriously, especially for those in power.
But even with all the bloodshed, the intrigue, we get a glimmer of hope. King Josiah, he comes to power in Judah, sparks a religious revival, brings the people back to God's law.
It all starts with that lost scroll of the law, right? Found in the temple.
Exactly, like finding a treasure map, but instead of gold, it leads to understanding God's will. Josiah jumps into action, launches a full-scale religious cleansing, tears down pagan altars, smashes idols. We're going back to basics.
Josiah even brings back the Passover celebration, but huge, bringing people together like they haven't been since the Judges. Remarkable transformation, spiritual renewal.
It really shows you the power of God's word, changing hearts, transforming societies.
Sadly, it doesn't last forever. 2 Kings, it shows us the realities of history, you know. The final chapters are about the Assyrian and Babylonian invasions. It all culminates in the fall of both Israel and Judah.
It's tough to read. Watching these once powerful kingdoms crumble, the people taken into exile, the capture of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, the temple destroyed, the Babylonian exile. It's a profound loss for the Israelites.
It's a stark reminder. Even moments of great revival, reform, they don't guarantee a happy ending. Past choices, individual and collective, they have a lasting impact.
Yeah, that sense of loss, it's really palpable. As we move into this next part of 2 Kings, the Assyrian Empire, they're really flexing their muscles. And both Israel and Judah, they're caught in the middle of this power struggle. It's almost like a political thriller. Alliances shifting, the stakes getting higher.
And right in the thick of it, we meet King Ahaz in Judah. He seems to make all the wrong choices, especially when it comes to religion. Instead of, following Josiah's example, he goes for the pagan practices, even sacrifices his own son in a pagan ritual.
Can you imagine the outcry? It's such a reversal from all the reforms Josiah worked so hard for. It makes you wonder, what was he thinking? Did he really believe in these other gods? Or was it like a desperate attempt to secure some political alliances, with Assyria breathing down his neck?
It's a tough question, right? It really shows how complex leadership can be. Ahaz seems to be putting politics above faith. He even goes and remodels the temple in Jerusalem based on an Assyrian altar, which, further alienates those who are still faithful to God.
Yeah, talk about a controversial renovation. It's like he's trying to erase what his father did and create a new identity for Judah, one that's aligned with Assyria.
But this whole shift towards Assyria, it has terrible consequences for the northern kingdom, Israel. Yeah. It's basically the beginning of the end for them. The Assyrian king, Shalmaneser V, he besieges Samaria, their capital, for 3 years. Can you imagine being trapped in that city? The fear, the uncertainty.
Must have felt like the world was ending. And eventually, the city falls. The Israelites are taken from their land, scattered throughout the Assyrian Empire, just like the prophets warned them, right? Because of their idolatry, their disobedience.
It's tragic, isn't it? The end of a kingdom that tried for centuries to stay true to God. What's even more, kind of fascinating, is that the Assyrians brought in people from other places to repopulate Samaria, this mix of religions, cultures.
Yeah, a forced reset. And it has a lasting impact, too. It's actually part of what leads to the Samaritan religion. They share some stuff with Judaism, but, Judah sees them as heretical. So centuries of tension, division between them.
Okay, so the northern kingdom is gone. Judah's trying to figure out what to do. Hezekiah, Ahaz's son, he takes the throne. He's a completely different kind of king than his father. He wants to undo the damage, bring back the worship of the one true God.
Hezekiah, he's a reformer at heart. He cleanses the temple, gets rid of all those pagan idols. He even destroys the bronze serpent, that relic from Moses' time that had become, an idol itself. Really shows you how committed he is to getting rid of false worship and going back to God's law.
That's a bold move, especially considering what's going on politically, right? Assyria is still a huge threat. And Hezekiah ends up facing Sennacherib, the Assyrian king, who wants to conquer Jerusalem.
Total David and Goliath situation. Sennacherib sends his advisor, Rabshakeh, to deliver this message to Hezekiah. It's meant to break him. Threats, insults, boasting about the Assyrian gods.
I'd probably just surrender.
Mm-hmm.
But Hezekiah, he doesn't. He prays, spreads the Assyrian letter out before God in the temple. It's humility, desperation. Only God can save them now.
And he doesn't just pray. He goes to the prophet Isaiah for guidance. Isaiah reassures him, tells him God has heard his prayer, Jerusalem will be protected. He even says that Sennacherib won't even shoot an arrow into the city.
Now, that's a bold prediction.
Mm.
So we've got the Assyrian army ready to attack, the people of Jerusalem holding on to hope, and this prophecy hanging in the air. What happens?
God acts. Big time. That very night, the angel of the Lord, he strikes down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. The next morning, the Assyrian camp is devastated. Sennacherib, defeated, humiliated, retreats back to Nineveh.
That's incredible. The power of prayer, God's faithfulness. But it's not the end for Judah, is it? Things actually get even more complicated. The kingdom goes up and down. Kings who are righteous, kings who are wicked.
It really is like a roller coaster, isn't it? It shows you how cyclical history can be. Just when things are going well, people fall back into sin, rebellion.
Yeah, like Hezekiah's son, Manasseh. One of the most wicked kings ever. He embraces idolatry, builds pagan altars right there in the temple. It's like he's trying to undo all the good his father did.
It's heartbreaking to see that decline, and God sees it too. 2 Kings tells us that God allows Manasseh to be captured by the Assyrians. He's taken to Babylon as a prisoner.
Must have been humbling for him. And in captivity, she repents, turns back to God. He even gets restored to his throne in Jerusalem, but the damage is done.
It shows you our choices have consequences. And even if you repent, it doesn't always erase the pain you've caused. The effects of sin, they can last for generations.
Manasseh's son, Amon, he follows in his father's footsteps, but he's assassinated. And then we come to Josiah.
Josiah. He's a bright spot in all this darkness. He's only 8 when he becomes king. But he turns out to be this wise, righteous leader, completely devoted to God's law.
Remember that scroll of the law. From Hezekiah's time, it plays a big role in Josiah's life too. When he hears the words of the law read, it sparks something in him. This passion to cleanse the land, restore the covenant with God.
He doesn't just talk about it, though. He acts, destroys pagan shrines, altars. He even desecrates the graves of those who were involved in idolatry. There's no room for false gods in Judah. Not anymore.
A bold move. And it leads to peace, prosperity. Josiah even takes his reforms north to Bethel. Destroys the altar there, which was a place of idol worship going all the way back to Jeroboam.
Really symbolic, right? Breaking down this long-standing tradition of rebellion. It's like he's saying, we're going back to how it should be. One God, one nation, united under his law.
A beautiful vision. Sadly, it doesn't last. Josiah is killed in battle, fighting Pharaoh Necho of Egypt, a battle he probably shouldn't have been in. His death, it changes everything for Judah.
Reminds you that even the best leaders, they aren't invincible. Their choices, even if they're well-intentioned, can have unintended tragic consequences.
After Josiah's death, instability, and this growing pressure from Babylon, the next few kings in Judah, mostly wicked, leading the people away from God. It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion. You could feel the tension building.
Right. You get these puppet kings put in place by foreign powers. They don't have the strength, the moral compass that Josiah had. It's a sad decline, crumbling from within as these outside forces are closing in.
Jehoiakim, Josiah's son, he's a tragic figure. Pharaoh Necho puts him on the throne, but then he becomes a subject of Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar. He rebels, makes foolish decisions, even burns a scroll with Jeremiah's warnings in it.
Talk about defiance, like he's challenging God. But we know actions have consequences. Nebuchadnezzar lays siege to Jerusalem. Jehoiakim is taken captive. He dies miserably, fulfilling the prophecies against him.
A real cautionary tale about pride, about resisting God's will.
And his son, Jehoiachin, he doesn't fare much better, rules for 3 months. Then Nebuchadnezzar captures him, takes him to Babylon, along with thousands of others. This is the start of the exile. A huge turning point for Israel. Displacement, loss.
Imagine being taken from your home, forced to live somewhere else. The heartbreak.
It's devastating, not just for their national identity, but for their faith, too. The temple, it represents God's presence. Now it's in enemy hands. The future is uncertain.
So Jehoiachin is gone. What happens to those who are left behind in Jerusalem?
Nebuchadnezzar makes Zedekiah, another of Josiah's sons, the new king. A puppet king, really. Zedekiah, he tries to seek God's guidance at first, but he's weak, indecisive. Some people are telling him to rebel against Babylon. Others are telling him to submit.
That's a tough position to be in, pulled in 2 directions.
Yeah, and he doesn't have the strength, the conviction to make a choice. That lack of resolve and his shaky faith, it leads to disaster. He chooses to rebel, and that seals Jerusalem's fate.
Heartbreaking. Nebuchadnezzar comes back with his army, besieges the city for 2 years. The people trapped inside. terrible conditions, famine, disease, constant fear.
The consequences of choices, how they can affect everyone, not just individuals, but whole nations.
The siege ends when Jerusalem's walls are breached. Zedekiah tries to escape, but he's captured. He has to watch as his sons are executed. I can't even imagine that.
It's brutal, meant to crush any resistance. Zedekiah himself, he's blinded, taken to Babylon in chains, he dies a prisoner. The Davidic dynasty, it's over. It started with so much promise, but it ends with corruption, disobedience.
It really makes you think. Even the strongest institutions, they can fall apart. 2 Kings doesn't have a happy ending, does it? But it teaches us about the consequences of our choices and about staying faithful to God.
The destruction of Jerusalem, the exile, it's a low point for Israel. But even in the darkest times, there's a glimmer of hope. 2 Kings ends with this little account of Jehoiachin, the exiled king. The Babylonian king, evil Merodach, releases him from prison.
It's a small act of kindness, but it makes you think maybe there's a chance for restoration.
Right. This ending, it's like a subtle hint of hope. God is still faithful. And maybe, just maybe, the people will be able to return to their land.
Yeah, it's like after all that little act of kindness, releasing Jehoiachin, it's like a breath of fresh air. Makes you wonder, maybe is there light at the end of the tunnel?
It does, doesn't it? Gives you a sense of hope. And yeah, we need that after seeing 2 kingdoms fall, God's people scattered. But 2 kings, it ends here. But Israel's story, it doesn't. We know from other books, historical accounts, that the exile does end. The people, they get to go back home, rebuild the temple, start over.
So it's not a completely hopeless ending. God's plan, it's bigger than all this. Even in exile, God is still with them. His promises, they remain.
Exactly. That's what I love about studying the Bible. It's not just stories, right? It's like human experience woven together with God's faithfulness. 2 Kings, all the drama, the tragedy. It points us to a God who is bigger than our failures. A God who brings restoration, hope, even from destruction.
We've covered a lot, haven't we? I mean, the entire book of 2 Kings, Elijah's chariot of fire, Elisha's miracles, kings rising and falling, faith and politics clashing.
Yeah.
What a ride.
It's packed with action, intrigue, spiritual lessons that are still relevant today, you know. Makes us think about our own lives, our choices, our relationship with God.
Definitely makes you think about consequences. How our actions, what we do, it affects things. Obedience to God, it brings blessings. Disobedience, it leads to consequences, sometimes for generations.
It's not just the big things, though. 2 Kings shows us that even small acts of faith, obedience, they matter. Think about the widow who trusted Elisha, right, to multiply her oil. Or those lepers who risked their lives to warn the city. They probably didn't think they were doing anything big, but their actions, they had a huge impact.
Like, we don't have to be prophets or kings to make a difference. It's our everyday choices, acts of kindness, speaking truth. Those things matter to God.
2 Kings is full of those moments, you know, the ones that make you stop and think, wow, that's so true. It reminds us that even when things seem hopeless, when we think we've messed up too badly, God is still there. God of justice, mercy, second chances.
So what stood out to you the most from 2 Kings? What really resonated? What questions do you still have?
Keep exploring, keep digging into this book. See what you discover. The Bible, it's a living book. It speaks to us, each of us, in different ways.
It's been quite a journey. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into 2 Kings. We'll see you next time for another adventure through the Bible.